blood soaked into the dry Colorado dirt, baking beneath an unforgiving 1,876 sun. She was left for dead, her fortune stolen by the man she was supposed to marry. As the vultures began to circle, the towering silhouette of a mountain man blocked out the blazing sun. The metallic taste of blood and the gritty sting of alkaline dust were the only things tethering Josephine Miller to the waking world. The sun, a merciless anvil in the cloudless Colorado sky, beat down upon her fractured body. Every breath she drew felt as though broken glass were scraping against her lungs. She lay motionless in the shadow of a jagged sandstone boulder, her once immaculate riding habit torn to ribbons, her auburn hair matted with dried blood and sweat. Just hours ago, she had been a woman with a future. She had been traveling westward on the Durango Trail with Montgomery Hayes, a man whose tailored suits and silver-tongued promises had charmed her grieving heart. Following the sudden death of her father, a wealthy prospector, Montgomery had offered her protection, love, and a safe passage to claim her inheritance. Instead, he had delivered a nightmare. The memory of the ambush flashed behind her swollen eyelids. There had been no bandits. There had only been Montgomery, his charming smile melting into a sneer of pure malice as the stagecoach driver lay dead in the brush. Montgomery's men had dragged her into the dirt. He had struck her not with the palm of his hand, but with the heavy, iron-weighted handle of his revolver. "Where is the deed to the Blue Creek mine, Josie?" His voice echoed in her fading consciousness, cold and detached. "Give it to me, and I'll make this quick." She hadn't given it to him. She had lied, spitting blood onto his polished boots, telling him she had sent the deed ahead to a bank in Denver. In his rage, he had ordered his men to beat her until she couldn't stand, stripping her of her cash, her jewelry, and her water canteen. They left her broken in the scrub brush, entirely certain that the desert or the coyotes would finish the job before nightfall. But Josephine was her father's daughter. She was stubborn, even in the face of death. A shadow fell over her face. She forced her right eye open, the left swollen completely shut. Through the haze of heat radiating off the hard-packed earth, she saw a beast. At first, her delirious mind conjured the image of a grizzly bear standing on its hind legs. The figure was massive, clad in heavy buckskin and furs despite the oppressive heat. A heavy boot crunched against the gravel. A horse snorted nearby. "Lord Almighty," a voice rumbled. It was deep, resonant, and rough as tree bark. Josephine tried to scream, to crawl away, but her body refused to obey. She managed only a weak, rattling gasp. The towering figure dropped to one knee. Enormous, calloused hands that looked capable of snapping a man's neck with a mere twist, reached out. She flinched, bracing for the final blow. Instead, a worn leather canteen was pressed gently against her cracked lips. Water, cool and life-giving, trickled into her mouth. She choked, coughing weakly, but the man merely adjusted her head, supporting her neck with surprising tenderness. "Easy now, little bird," he murmured. "Drink slow. You're a long way from heaven, but you ain't in hell just yet." As her vision cleared fractionally, she saw his face. He had a thick, dark beard peppered with gray, and a jagged, pale scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline. But it was his eyes that arrested her. Beneath the rugged, frightening exterior were eyes of piercing, glacial blue. They were eyes that had seen profound tragedy, yet they held no cruelty. His name was Jeremiah Stone. He was a man who had turned his back on civilization a decade ago, trading the lies of society for the brutal honesty of the San Juan Mountains. He only came down to the lower trails twice a year to trade pelts for coffee, gunpowder, and salt. He didn't want trouble. He had spent 10 years actively avoiding it. But looking down at the broken woman in the dirt, he knew the mountains would have to wait. "Who did this to you?" Jeremiah asked, his voice a low growl. Montgomery," she wheezed, the word tearing at her throat. He took." "Hush," Jeremiah said, seeing her eyes roll back. He carefully slipped his arms beneath her knees and behind her shoulders. With a grunt, he stood, lifting her as effortlessly as if she were a child. The pain of the movement was white-hot. Josephine cried out, burying her face into his broad chest before the darkness finally rushed up to swallow her. Jeremiah carried her toward his massive draft horse, Samson. He secured her carefully across his saddle, tying her gently so she wouldn't fall. He looked back at the wagon tracks leading off toward the south. His jaw tightened, the muscles ticking beneath his beard. He didn't know who Montgomery was, but he knew the law of the wild. Predators who hunted the weak eventually needed to be put down. With a click of his tongue, Jeremiah led the horse away from the trail, heading straight up into the steep, treacherous incline of the San Juans. The air grew thinner, the desert heat giving way to the biting chill of the high-altitude pines. He had to get her to his cabin before the fever set in, or the men who did this would have effectively dug her grave. When Josephine next opened her eyes, the world was no longer blinding white and scorching hot. It was bathed in the warm, flickering, amber glow of a hearth fire. The scent of burning pine, dried sage, and simmering meat filled her senses. She was lying on a sturdy wooden bed, tucked beneath a mountain of heavy wolf and bear pelts. Her riding habit was gone. In its place, she wore an oversized, rough-spun wool shirt that swallowed her frame. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her mind. She tried to sit up, but a sharp agony radiated from her ribs, forcing a sharp cry from her lips as she collapsed back against the feather pillow. "Told you to take it easy." The voice came from the corner of the room. Jeremiah stepped out of the shadows, a wooden bowl in his hand. He looked even larger indoors, his broad shoulders nearly brushing the low beams of the cabin roof. He had removed his heavy outer coat, wearing only a faded Henley that clung to thick, corded muscles. Josephine shrank back against the headboard, pulling the pelts up to her chin. "Where am I? Where are my clothes?" "You're in my home," Jeremiah said calmly, stopping a few feet from the bed to give her space, up near the timberline. "As for your clothes, they were soaked in blood and dirt. I burned them to keep the infection away. Cleaned your wounds while you were out. You've got 3 cracked ribs, a busted lip, and enough bruises to paint a sunset. But you'll live." Josephine stared at him, her heart hammering against her bruised chest. She realized, with a flush of heat to her cheeks, that this giant of a stranger had bathed her, bandaged her ribs, and dressed her. Yet, looking into his steady blue eyes, she found no lechery, no predatory gleam, only a quiet, solemn duty. I am Josephine," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "Josephine Miller." "Jeremiah Stone," he replied, setting the bowl on a small wooden stool beside the bed. "Drink the broth. It's venison. You've been asleep for 2 days. Your body needs the strength." Over the next week, the cabin became a sanctuary, suspended above the world. Outside, the wind howled through the towering spruces, isolating them in a sea of green and white as an early autumn snow blanketed the mountain. Inside, a fragile, unspoken truce formed between the broken heiress and the solitary mountain man. Jeremiah was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He chopped extra wood to keep the cabin stiflingly warm for her. He boiled willow bark to ease her pain. He never pried into her past, never demanded answers. He gave her space, moving around the cabin with a quiet grace that belied his massive size. In turn, Josephine watched him. She noticed the way he meticulously cleaned his Winchester rifle every night. She noticed the worn, silver wedding band on his left hand. And she noticed the deep, lingering sorrow that settled over his features whenever he stared into the fire. She had spent her life among the gentlemen of high society, men like Montgomery, who hid their rot behind silk cravats. Jeremiah was the opposite. He was rough, wild, and scarred, but he possessed a fundamental decency that moved her. By the 8th day, Josephine was able to sit up by the fire, wrapped in a blanket. The swelling in her face had reduced to a mottled yellowish purple. "Why are you up here, Jeremiah?" she asked softly one evening, watching him whittle a piece of pine. "Alone in the clouds?" His knife paused. He didn't look up for a long time. "Men are a plague, Josephine. They take, they burn, and they destroy. I had a life, once. Down in a valley, near a river. Had a wife, Abigail. His voice cracked slightly on the name. Outlaws came through while I was out hunting. Wanted our horses, wanted her. By the time I got back, there was nothing left to save. Josephine felt a tear slip down her cheek. I'm so sorry. I tracked him down. Every last one, Jeremiah continued, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. When I was done, I realized I wasn't fit for the world of decent folk anymore. So, I came up here, where the only predators have 4 legs and look you in the eye before they kill you. He finally looked at her. Now, tell me why a man named Montgomery left a lady like you in the dirt to rot. Josephine took a shaky breath and told him everything. She told him about her father, the Blue Creek silver mine, and the millions of dollars worth of ore resting beneath the ground. She told him about Montgomery's deceit, the murder of the driver, and how Montgomery was hunting for the deed. He thinks I sent it to Denver, Josephine said, her hands trembling as she reached beneath the oversized wool shirt. From a chain around her neck, she pulled out a small, heavy silver locket. She popped it open. Inside wasn't a portrait, but a tightly folded, wax-sealed piece of parchment. But I never did. It's right here. It's legally mine. And Montgomery will kill anyone who gets in his way to take it. Jeremiah stared at the parchment, then looked at the fire. The silence stretched, heavy and fraught with impending doom. The next morning, Jeremiah saddled Samson. I need to go down to Silverton, he announced, strapping his rifle to the saddle. Need bandages, and I need to hear what the whispers are in town. You lock that door from the inside, Josephine. Do not open it for anyone but me. Be careful, she whispered, realizing with a sudden, terrifying jolt how much she had come to rely on this rugged stranger. Jeremiah was gone for 2 days. When he returned, the heavy door of the cabin swung open, bringing with it a swirl of freezing snow. Josephine stood up from the hearth, relief flooding her system until she saw his face. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles bulged, and his blue eyes burned with a fierce, cold fire. He didn't say a word. He walked to the wooden table, reached into his heavy coat, and slammed a crumpled piece of paper down onto the wood. Josephine approached cautiously. She smoothed the paper out, her breath catching in her throat. It was a wanted poster. Beneath a surprisingly accurate sketch of her face were the bold, black letters. Wanted, dead or alive, Josephine Miller, for the brutal murder of a stagecoach driver and the theft of the Blue Creek mine deed. Reward, $5,000. Montgomery, she gasped, her legs giving out. Jeremiah caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to a chair. He's smart, Jeremiah growled, pacing the small room like a caged wolf. He beat you, left you for dead, and then rode into town and played the grieving fiancé. Said you lost your mind, shot the driver, stole the deed, and ran off into the hills. Every bounty hunter, lawman, and low-life scumbag in the territory is looking for you right now. Josephine covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I'm trapped. If I go to the law, they'll hang me. If Montgomery's men find me, they'll torture me for the locket and kill me anyway. I have to leave. I can't bring this to your door, Jeremiah. You've already lost too much. She tried to stand, but Jeremiah stepped in front of her. His massive hands gently gripped her shoulders, halting her. I told you, Jeremiah said, his voice rumbling with an unshakable, terrifying resolve. I couldn't save Abigail. I was too late. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look into his eyes. The isolation that had shielded his heart for 10 years was cracking, replaced by a fierce, protective devotion that took her breath away. I ain't too late this time, Josephine, he vowed, his thumb gently brushing a tear from her bruised cheek. They want to come up my mountain to take you? Let 'em come. I'll bury every last one of them in the snow. The winter of 1876 arrived in the San Juan Mountains with a ferocious, howling vengeance. Within 2 days of Jeremiah discovering the bounty poster, the timberline was buried beneath 3 feet of dense, packed snow. To anyone else, the storm would have been a death sentence. an icy tomb sealing them away from the rest of the world. But to Jeremiah Stone, the blizzard was a tactical advantage. He knew the mountain's moods, its hidden crevices, and its treacherous false trails. He knew the terrain better than he knew his own reflection. Down in the valley, Montgomery Hayes was not deterred by the weather. Fueled by greed and the terrifying realization that Josephine was still alive, he had spared no expense. He had journeyed to Durango and secured the services of Marshal Wade Harrison, a notoriously corrupt lawman whose badge was little more than a license for legalized murder. Montgomery spun his web of lies beautifully, paying Harrison a staggering sum in advance to lead a posse of ruthless mercenaries up the mountain. Montgomery claimed that Josephine was a deranged, hysterical woman who had slaughtered their driver and fled with the priceless Blue Creek mine deed, seeking refuge with a violent mountain savage. "I want her brought back alive if possible," Montgomery had instructed Harrison in the smoke-filled saloon in Silverton. "But if she resists, or if that mountain man gets in the way, put them both in the ground. Just bring me her belongings, especially a silver locket." For a week, the cabin remained a tense sanctuary. Jeremiah spent his days meticulously setting snares and tripwires along the only accessible ridge leading to his property. He taught Josephine how to load his spare six-shooter, a heavy Colt revolver that felt massive in her healing hands. He guided her hands, his rough, calloused fingers wrapping around hers, the proximity sending a warm, distracting flutter through her chest despite the impending danger. "You don't shoot to frighten them, Josephine," Jeremiah instructed, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded absolute focus. "You shoot to stop them. If they cross that tree line, they aren't men anymore. They are wolves at the door." Josephine nodded, her jaw set with a newfound determination. The terrified, broken heiress who had been left bleeding in the dirt was gone, burned away by the harsh reality of frontier survival and the quiet, unwavering strength of the man beside her. She watched Jeremiah sharpen his hunting knife, admiring the broad sweep of his shoulders and the fierce, protective light in his glacial blue eyes. She realized, with a sudden, overwhelming clarity, that she loved him. She loved this scarred, solitary giant who had risked everything to pull her back from the abyss. The attack came at dawn on a freezing Tuesday morning. The first warning was not a shout or a gunshot, but the sudden, frantic cawing of ravens taking flight from the eastern ridge. Jeremiah, who had been sleeping in a chair by the fire, was instantly awake. He grabbed his Winchester rifle and peered through the narrow, frost-covered window. "They're here," he whispered, his voice dangerously calm. "Stay low, Josephine. Keep away from the windows." Through the blinding glare of the morning sun reflecting off the snow, Jeremiah spotted the silhouettes of 10 men trudging up the steep incline. They were exhausted, freezing, and struggling through the deep drifts, completely unaware that they were walking into a meticulously prepared killing field. Montgomery was near the back, wrapped in expensive furs, while Marshal Harrison led the vanguard. When the posse reached the narrowest part of the ridge, Jeremiah acted. He cracked the heavy wooden window shutter just enough to rest the barrel of his Winchester. He took a slow, deep breath, calculating the wind and the drop, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle barked, a sharp crack that echoed like thunder across the canyon. The lead mercenary, stepping over a concealed tripwire, collapsed backward into the snow, a crimson stain blossoming across his chest. Panic erupted. The mercenaries scrambled for cover behind snow-covered boulders and massive pine trunks, blindly firing their repeaters toward the cabin. Bullets splintered the heavy log walls, but the structure was built to withstand avalanches and bear attacks. It easily absorbed the lead. "Flush him out!" Marshal Harrison roared, waving his revolver. "He's just one man!" But Jeremiah was not fighting like a man. He was fighting like a phantom. He moved rapidly from window to window, laying down precise, punishing, suppressive fire. He shot a branch hanging directly above 3 crouching gunmen, sending hundreds of pounds of packed snow crashing down upon them, burying them instantly. He then ignited a long, oil-soaked fuse he had run beneath the floorboards out to the ridge. Seconds later, a deafening explosion ripped through the tree line as a stash of blasting powder detonated, sending a shockwave of snow, dirt, and shrapnel into the air. 2 more mercenaries fled down the mountain, completely abandoning the contract. Montgomery screamed at them to return, his face purple with rage, but they vanished into the white expanse. Inside the cabin, Josephine knelt by the heavy oak door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She gripped the Colt revolver, her eyes fixed on the latch. Suddenly, a heavy thud shook the rear of the cabin. Someone had managed to flank them during the explosion. She heard the crunch of boots on the back porch, followed by the sound of glass shattering as a heavy rifle butt smashed through the small kitchen window. A massive, bearded mercenary started pulling himself through the broken frame. Jeremiah was reloading his Winchester on the opposite side of the room, too far away. "Josephine!" he shouted. She didn't hesitate. Remembering Jeremiah's steady voice, she raised the heavy Colt, leveled it at the intruder's chest, and pulled the trigger. The recoil jolted her arm backward, ringing her ears, but the shot found its mark. The man gasped, his eyes widening in shock before he tumbled backward off the porch and disappeared into the snowdrift below. Jeremiah looked at her, a profound mixture of pride and relief washing over his scarred face. "Good girl," he panted, snapping his rifle shut. But the battle was far from over. Marshal Harrison, enraged and desperate, ordered his remaining 3 men to rush the front door with a heavy, freshly chopped pine log. They slammed the makeshift battering ram against the reinforced oak. The heavy hinges groaned in protest. Wood splintered. They hit it again, and the iron deadbolt began to bend. "Get behind the bed," Jeremiah ordered, dropping his rifle and drawing his own twin revolvers, stepping directly into the center of the room. With a final, deafening crash, the front door gave way, bursting inward on a cloud of freezing wind and snow. Marshal Harrison and his 2 remaining deputies spilled into the room, their guns drawn, but Jeremiah was faster. In a blur of motion, his revolvers barked twice. The 2 deputies dropped their weapons and crumpled to the floor, incapacitated. Harrison managed to fire 1 wild shot that grazed Jeremiah's shoulder, tearing through his buckskin coat, before Jeremiah's heavy boot kicked the gun from the corrupt lawman's hand. Jeremiah lunged, grabbing Harrison by the throat and slamming him against the rough-hewn log wall. The marshal gagged, his feet kicking helplessly above the floorboards. "Wait!" a voice screamed from the doorway. Montgomery Hayes stepped into the cabin, shivering violently. A small, silver-plated derringer pointed squarely at Josephine, who had been exposed when the door burst open. Montgomery's charming facade was entirely gone. His hair was wild, his eyes bloodshot, and his expensive coat stained with soot and snow. "Let him go, you mountain freak," Montgomery spat, his hand trembling as he aimed the tiny gun at Josephine's head. "Or the heiress dies right now." Jeremiah froze. His grip on Harrison loosened just enough for the lawman to wheeze for air, but his icy blue eyes locked onto Montgomery with murderous intent. "Montgomery," Josephine said, her voice remarkably steady, "you've lost. Even if you kill me, you will never leave this mountain alive. Look at him." She nodded toward Jeremiah. "He will tear you to pieces." "Shut up!" Montgomery shrieked, panic breaking his voice. "I want the deed! Give me the locket, Josie! I planned this for months! I poisoned your miserable father! I manipulated you. I financed this entire charade, and I am not leaving empty-handed. Give me the Blue Creek deed." In his hysteria, Montgomery had made a fatal error. He hadn't noticed that one of the deputies on the floor, a young, idealistic man named William, who had been conscripted by Harrison under false pretenses, was still conscious. William lay clutching a bleeding shoulder, his eyes wide as he listened to Montgomery loudly confess to murder, conspiracy, and fraud. "You poisoned my father?" Josephine whispered, the final puzzle piece locking into place, bringing a fresh wave of devastating grief. "Arsenic in his whiskey," Montgomery sneered. "Now throw the locket." Jeremiah acted on pure instinct. He didn't drop his guns. He threw Marshal Harrison. With a monstrous roar, Jeremiah hurled the heavy lawman directly into Montgomery's path. Montgomery fired, the Derringer's bullet burying itself into Harrison's chest instead of Josephine. Before Montgomery could cock the Derringer again, Jeremiah crossed the room in two massive strides. He didn't use a weapon. He simply drove his fist into Montgomery's face with the force of a falling anvil. The sheer impact shattered Montgomery's jaw, sending the crooked businessman flying backward out the open doorway to land in a broken, unconscious heap in the blood-stained snow. Silence descended upon the ruined cabin, broken only by the howling mountain wind and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Jeremiah rushed to Josephine, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, her hands clutching his shirt as the adrenaline finally crashed, leaving her sobbing. Jeremiah held her tightly, resting his chin against her hair, his eyes squeezed shut in overwhelming relief. The young deputy on the floor, William, coughed weakly. I heard it," he rasped, holding a rag to his shoulder. "I heard him confess to killing Elias Miller." "I swear it, ma'am. He played us all for fools. If you help me down this mountain, I'll testify to the federal judge in Denver. Judge Isaac Parker himself rides the circuit here. I'll clear your name." Days later, the storm broke, revealing a brilliant, sunlit valley. True to his word, Deputy William survived the descent and testified before the circuit authorities in Silverton. Marshal Harrison's corruption was exposed, and the wanted posters bearing Josephine's face were immediately torn down. Montgomery Hayes, his jaw wired shut, was transported to a federal penitentiary to await the hangman's noose for the murder of Elias Miller. Josephine inherited the Blue Creek Mine, becoming one of the wealthiest independent women in the Colorado Territory overnight. Lawyers and suitors flocked to her, expecting her to return to the opulent ballrooms of Denver or San Francisco. But high society had lost its appeal. She had seen the ugliness that hid behind silk and silver, and she had discovered the profound, untamed beauty that existed in the wild. A month later, a heavy wagon pulled up the newly cleared trail leading to the timberline. Josephine, dressed in sturdy denim and a thick wool coat, stepped down from the buckboard. She carried supplies, new glass for the windows, and a brand new Winchester rifle. Jeremiah stood on the porch of the repaired cabin, chopping wood. He stopped, the heavy axe resting by his side, as he watched her approach. The deep sorrow that had haunted his eyes for a decade was gone, replaced by a radiant, quiet joy. "Thought you might stay down in the valley, little bird," he murmured, a slow, gentle smile breaking through his thick beard. "You're a wealthy woman now." Josephine walked up the wooden steps, closing the distance between them. She reached out, her delicate hands resting against his massive chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. "My fortune is just silver and dirt, Jeremiah," she said softly, looking up into his glacial blue eyes. "My home is right here." Jeremiah dropped the axe. His strong arms enveloped her, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her beneath the towering pines, sealing a promise born in blood, forged in winter, and bound by an unbreakable love. They built an empire, not of mines or money, but of peace, ruling together as the unchallenged king and queen of the San Juan Mountains. If you were captivated by Josephine and Jeremiah's tale of survival, betrayal, and wild frontier justice, please hit that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life-inspired historical dramas and Wild West romances. Your support helps us bring these forgotten legends back to life. Drop a comment below to let us know which part of their journey surprised you the most. See you in the next video.